Starting our list off at number 10, Lake Nyos. We love talking about Pompeii. We can't get enough of it. I'm fascinated. They have a restaurant that's back and open now in Pompeii. It's crazy. Now that's quite the eruption. Historically, that's a bad one. That's pretty scary. But a recent eruption in 1986, well, we don't talk about this one enough. First of all, a limnic eruption is a rare event, so you can sleep not in fear tonight. It occurs when CO2 dissolved in deep water lakes suddenly erupts. Cause yeah, that can happen. Who knew that? That's why I don't like lakes. There you go, right there. These events have only been observed twice, the deadliest being Lake Nyos in 1986. When a limnic eruption occurs, large clouds of CO2 form, which then all of a sudden descend and drop below the oxygen in the air, causing all living things in the vicinity to choke and not survive anymore. In this case, the cloud fell on nearby villages, ultimately causing the deaths of 1,700 people and 3,500 livestock. Number 9, the Great Dying. This name's pretty accurate if I'm being honest myself. Scariest environment imaginable. Here we go. Turning the clocks and solar system back 252 million years ago, the Permian Triassic extinction, which for convenience sake we'll call the Great Dying, was and hopefully shall remain the largest extinction event on Earth. The fact that we're even alive right now, watching this video, clicking that thumbs up and subscribing, well, it's all pretty rare, all things considered. This was a butterfly effect triggered by a massive volcanic eruption around the Serbian Traps in Russia. A runaway greenhouse effect was responsible for the loss of 95% of all marine life and 70% of all land animals. That's so everything, pretty much everything's gone. Temperatures rose as the sea began to absorb large quantities of CO2 from the atmosphere. Mentioned that a little earlier, and that could not be great. And it began turning into carbonic acid, hence all that marine life that didn't make it. Methane hydrate then started to bubble from the ocean surface, which is horrifying to imagine, and it raised the temperature even higher at that point. Now, imagine if this didn't happen. We'd have those scary sharks still swimming around. We're remnants of the surviving 4% of the Great Dying. Yeah, tell all your friends that. I'm gonna add that to my LinkedIn. That sounds not half bad. Yeah, I survived the Great Dying, so yeah. Really good at scooping ice cream. Let's do it. Number 8, the Spanish flu of 1918. The Spanish flu of 1918. Okay, yeah, this one's probably pretty good. Since we know a little something about plagues now in real life and toilet paper and stress, let's turn the clocks back 95 years when the Spanish flu entered the game. What was it like back then? The Spanish flu, if you didn't know, it was a strain of the H1N1 virus, which we all know as well. And when it hit, it took 50 to 100 million people. Very fast. 4% of the world's population gone. Now, it was recent and it was quite horrible. We couldn't stay home and watch Ozark for that one, so instead, the Spanish flu is said to have spread so violently because of soldiers being in close quarters during World War I. Yeah, again, very different than our plague. Immune systems were shot as is, and you're telling me a plague rolled through while we're in trenches? No way, what a nightmare. But just like that, the virus disappeared. Better treatment, perhaps it mutated into a much weaker strain. Either way, great, stay gone. Get out of here. Go away and stay there, pal. Hit that thumbs up for the Spanish flu not being around. Awesome, we love that. It's a good one to not have. Number 7, Maximilien Robespierre. On July 27th, 1794, French revolutionary Maximilien Robespierre and 21 of his followers were all arrested at the Hotel de Ville in Paris. Now, considering that this was 1794 and we got arrested, what follows is sure to be a public nightmare. The next day, Robespierre and again 21 of his followers were all taken to the Place de Revolution, where they were all executed by guillotine before a cheering crowd. Always a cheering crowd, of course. What else are we doing today? Let's go watch. What history tends to leave out of this part is that Maximilian attempted to take his own life beforehand because he knew his fate was gonna suck with the whole, thing. But when he tried to take his own life, he survived and was left instead with a nasty jaw wound. So in Game of Thrones fashion, the executioner, when the time came, ripped the jaw bandage off first, and then he saw the guillotine. Yeah, again, to a cheering crowd, remember? They all watched all of this unfold. I can't even watch UFC sometimes. You're telling me people watch this? IRL? I'm gonna go throw up real quick. Be right back. Number 6, the eruption. Mount Pinatubo, which is located in the Philippines, was another volcanic eruption that shook up history. A little more recent than the other one. This was on June 15th, 1991. Mount Pinatubo, this massive volcano, erupted into what would be the second largest volcanic eruption of the 20th century. Impressive? Yes. Terrifying? Absolutely. Yep, this is very loud and scary. Activity in the volcano first started on April 2nd, 1991, and these things take a little time to, finish up. So that same year, researchers set up seismographs in the area, and by June, the volcano was having a group of progressively shallower eruptions, and then on June 12th, the volcano had its first spectacular eruption, which sent hot ash 19 kilometers up into the atmosphere, which then rained on down to everything around it, which is the worst thing I can imagine. Additional smaller eruptions continued on June 13th, which then led to some intense seismic activity. And then, on June 15th, the volcano once again went off, this time sending a cloud of ash 40 kilometers into the atmosphere. So, bye-bye sun for a little bit. This one's gonna linger. Number 5, the Challenger crew. This is a photo that was taken of clearly the very excited Challenger crew right before when they were walking down the ramp, ready to head off on their mission. Now, this photo is chilling, but it's nice to see them happy and together. The crew even included, at the time, 37-year-old Kristen McAuliffe, who was a high school social studies teacher. You may remember this, but your parents definitely do. See, she had won a spot on the mission through a program with NASA called the Teacher in Space program, and she had trained diligently for months in order to be the first ever non-military individual in space. On January 28th, 1986, the Challenger mission proved to be faithful just 73 seconds after liftoff. See, 2 rubber O-rings failed because of the cold temperatures that morning, and on live television, the world had to watch as a spacecraft broke apart and then fell into the ocean, sadly taking the lives of everybody on board the craft. Now, I'm not sure if you've watched the documentary on Netflix, but it's a mini-series about this whole thing and its powerful stuff. It's really emotional. I just finished it and it's moving. Number 4, the core. This photo shows a physicist named Harold Agnew, and while this photo looks relatively normal and scientific or whatever, a non-threatening photo, what he has in his hands is truly devastating. It changed history. Harold is holding the nuclear core of what was nicknamed the Fat Man. Yeah, that thing. This means that Harold is now holding the nuclear core of the atomic weapon that was later dropped on Nagasaki in 1945. The immediate blast took many lives, as well as the long-term effects of radiation illnesses. Now, it's crazy to look at a photo like this because it seems so perfectly normal when he literally has a life-changing, world-ending device in the palm of his hand, like a literal supervillain holding kryptonite. I couldn't imagine seeing that, let alone holding it. No way. My grandmother wouldn't even hold me as a baby because I was too small and fragile. Think she'd hold this? No way. Butterfingers. Butterfingers galore over there. Number 3, the Ball of Burning Men. January 28th, 1393. You are formally invited to a masquerade ball. How fun is that? Who is it under that mask? Oh, it's just Taylor on Bumblebee. Love him. He's great. The French Queen Isabeau of Bavaria is now hosting one of the most lavish parties of the decade, right? So bring your finest and longest krakows. Roll it in style. Now, when the French royal court was celebrating the marriage of one of the Queen's ladies in waiting, it of course was a big deal. It's fun. It's a big happy day. For some, the best days of their lives. For others at this ball, not so great. Probably the last days of their lives. King Charles VI had 5 companions perform a dance or a theater routine of sorts. Now, they did a performance as beasts. They were committed to the bit, right? They had these big, lovely masks, big baggy outfits, lots of linen, lots of stuffing to appear as if they were real beasts. Now, the party was going well, wine was spilling, people were laughing, beasts were roaring, we were committed, but one rule beforehand was put into place before the party started. Absolutely, positively, no open flames. Obviously, right? I mean, look at that guy. He looks like a couch. We're not gonna put a match near him. It's gonna be chaos. The Duke of Orleans had a little too much fun prior to this event, and he forgot the first rule of Fight Club when he arrived. The guy walked in with a lit torch. He wanted to see everyone. Some accounts say he dropped the torch by accident. Others say he got too close trying to guess the identity of said beasts. Either way, this tragic event took the lives of 4 people, hence the name Ball of the Burning Men. That's terrible, imagine that, what a gig. Number 2, the Stanford Prison Experiment. One of the most well-known experiments of all time was the Stanford Prison Experiment. It was an attempt to investigate the psychological effects of perceived power, and it worked. A little too well, I'd say. Guards and prisoners were all chosen randomly, from college students to anyone, your neighbor. You had no idea. Nobody really knew just how bad this experiment would end up, so anyone volunteered. Those in power were taking it to an extreme level. It was absolute psychological distress. Some of the prisoners went insane. The whole exercise was abandoned after only 6 days, which is not a short amount of time, but historians say just 6 days because it was intended to last much longer. Now, it's shocking to see the lengths people go after receiving power over another human being. I thought I was evil unplugging my brother's controller and playing, and he wasn't plugged in. This is Next level. And finally, number 1, mummified pets. Are you a pet owner? If so, comment down below which animals fill your house. We love that. Olivia and I want to get a dog so bad. I was always a dog guy growing up. My aunt had 3 pugs. It was the dream. I love it. Ancient Egyptians, they fancied a house pet or two. We know this. But Egyptians saw animals as incarnations of the gods, which I do too with my Shih Tzu, of course. The very concept of having a pet came from ancient Egyptians, so thank you. Egyptians were of course fans of cats. That's common knowledge at this point. But did you know they also had the same idea for hawks, lions, dogs, and baboons? Yeah, baboons. That's amazing. Go ask your parents for a baboon as a pet. There you go. I thought dogs doing their business inside was annoying, but a lion? Your arm's gonna be tired scooping that one up. Many of these animals were often mummified and buried with their owners after they'd passed, just like how many owners today cremate their pets. I mean, I'm not sure I would mummify a Shih Tzu, but hey, whatever floats your boat, who am I to judge? Other creatures were specially trained to work as helper animals back then. So ancient Egyptian police officers would use dogs and monkeys to help patrolling, then they'd mummify them. What a time, imagine that.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the facial expressions experiment. In 1924, a psychologist with the University of Minnesota, Carney Landis, wanted to conduct an experiment to study facial expressions. More specifically, he wanted to see if everyone's expressions of emotions were the same. Does happiness look the same on everyone? Does sadness, shock, disgust, etc. make us all react the same way facially? An interesting question for sure, but the method was strange. Basically, he recruited some student volunteers and then painted the lines of their facial muscles black. He then exposed each participant to different stimuli in order to photograph their reactions and then of course compare the results. This is all fine, except for what the stimuli actually contained. I guess this guy just really wanted big reactions because he included showing them adult films, exposing them to ammonia, making them touch reptiles, and even beheading rats. Apparently, 1/3 of the participants willingly did this beheading when told, despite not knowing how to do it humanely, and even if they did know how to do it humanely, why would you? And for the 2/3 that were regular and did not just behead a rat because a strange man told them to, unfortunately Carney did it for them. I'm not even sure what the results of this experiment were, and I have to ask, does it even matter? What an actual nightmare for something that largely just doesn't really have an impact on our lives. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Hofling Hospital Experiment. This experiment happened all the way back in 1966 in a time where the rules of psychological experiments were a lot more loosey-goosey. Because of this, the nurses that were all a part of this experiment had no idea that they were participants, which nowadays is very, very illegal. Basically, this experiment took place on the night shift. The night nurse would receive a phone call during the shift, and on the other end would be Dr. Smith, who's actually a researcher. He would ask the nurses to check the medicine cabinet to see if they had a drug called astrotin, which was actually a drug that was just made up for this experiment, and it was just a placebo. The astrotin would clearly state the maximum dosage of 10 milligrams, but Dr. Smith would ask the nurses to administer 20 milligrams. They were told that the doctor was in a hurry and he would sign all of the authorization papers as soon as he came in to see the patient later on that night. If the nurse decided to give the patient the drug, they would be breaking 3 rules. They are not allowed to accept instructions over the phone, the dose was double the maximum limit stated on the box, and the medicine itself was unauthorized. It was not on the ward stock list, so it shouldn't be in use at the hospital. Out of the 22 unknowing nurse participants, 21 of them administered the drug. That's insane. This isn't to say that the nurses were bad people or that they were bad at their job, but this experiment combined with the interviews that happened afterwards just showed how the power imbalance and the social pressures that come along with that can affect the outcome of a workplace extremely drastically, and in this case it really could have been a matter of life and death. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Milgram experiment. The premise of this experiment was that they took 2 groups of people, one called teachers and one called learners, and they paired them up, one from each group. The pair couldn't see each other, but the teacher would ask the learner a question. If the learner got it wrong, the teacher was then told to give them an electric shock. Every question made the shocks get worse until an eventual fatal shock would be administered. Before the experiment, it was proposed that only 3% of the participants would go all of the way and actually give the fatal shock. But it turned out that under pressure, 65% of the teachers actually gave the lethal dose of electricity to their learner counterparts. Luckily, the students were actually just actors, so no one was truly getting hurt or shocked to death in this experiment, but it honestly is very creepy and very disturbing to see these poor people being pushed so far past their boundaries, and it's kind of unsettling to know the results. In our number 7 spot today, we have Bobby, Eddie, and David. When Bobby Shafran was 19 years old, he found out he had a twin, a brother named Eddie. The two were raised separately because they had been adopted at birth into different households. Not too long after finding out about each other, things took an even crazier twist when Bobby and Eddie found out that they had a triplet, another brother named David. What should have been a very joyous reunion for the triplets turned very dark when they began to uncover the truth about what happened and why they had spent all of those years not knowing the others existed. As it turns out, they found out they were forced to be subjects of an experiment they had no idea was taking place. Peter Neubauer was a child psychiatrist who wanted to study nature versus nurture, but decided to do it in this cruel and unethical way. He believed that twins or triplets had a better chance of thriving if they were separated from their twin, and he wanted to prove this by unknowingly separating twins from each other at birth. Luckily, Bobby, Eddie, and David all found each other, and their story is documented in the movie 3 Identical Strangers. In our number 6 spot today, we have telephone cats. Sorry to all the cat people out there, this one isn't going to be for you. In 1929, 2 scientists at Princeton University wanted to conduct an experiment in order to test how auditory nerves perceive sounds. This is obviously extremely important research, but the way they went about it is very messed up. They took a sedated but alive cat and cut out part of its brain. They then attached one end of a telephone wire to the cat's auditory nerve and the other end to a receiver. When one of these scientists spoke into the cat's ear, the other one could hear it on the other end. This is cool, but most definitely not an excuse to do something so inhumane. There were benefits of this experiment, of course, and it is believed that it may have helped lead to the development of cochlear implants, which is of course an incredibly important scientific advancement. The worst part, however, while the cat actually survived this experiment, instead of treating it like a king for the rest of its life like it truly deserved, these scientists instead killed it to see if the experiment would still work on a dead cat. It didn't. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Pit of Despair. This experiment was conducted by Henry Harlow and is one of the most controversial on this list. In a sort of mental health study, Henry decided to induce depression in monkeys. He took very young monkeys and separated them from their peers and mothers and put them into isolation in a cage that was called the Pit of Despair. Sometimes the monkeys would stay there for longer, more extended periods, and other times they would be repeatedly separated and put into the cage for multiple shorter stays. These monkeys all proved to be extremely psychologically disturbed after the conclusion of this experiment, which should have seemed kind of obvious even before the experiment was conducted. These monkeys were used as a model of human clinical depression, but here's where things get even sadder than they already were. These monkeys were unable to be treated and rehabilitated. Despite various forms of treatment, they were just unable to get to a place they would have been had they not have been subject to a cruel experiment. In our number 4 spot today, we have psychic driving. A part of Project MKUltra, this experiment was conducted by British psychiatrist Donald Ewan Cameron, who created the psychic driving concept that the CIA found interesting. Basically, psychic driving was a procedure that subjects patients to a continuous repeated audio loop of something that is intended to change their behavior. Basically, the patients would be exposed to hundreds of thousands of repetitions of a singular statement through the course of their treatment, and they would also be subjected to paralytic drugs that would subdue them while being exposed to this looped message. Yeah, so the CIA heard about this idea for a treatment and thought, that sounds cool. Then they started sending money to fund Cameron's experiments, but he actually didn't know it was coming from the CIA because they used a front. So Cameron's psychic driving experiments for MKUltra began to take place in Canada. I guess they said that the aim of the experiments were to get rid of or cure someone of schizophrenia by erasing existing memories and reprogramming the psyche. I'm not sure that's how schizophrenia works, but I guess they did. Cameron would subject patients to paralytic drugs, and electroconvulsive therapy that was 30 to 40 times the normal power. He would also put the experiment subjects into induced comas while exposing them to the repeated audio. The experiments were mostly conducted on patients who entered the institute from more common problems like anxiety disorders or postpartum depression, and they ended up leaving with permanent effects from his actions. These included things like urinary incontinence, amnesia, being unable to speak. Some people forgot their parents and thought that the interrogators were their parents. It clearly completely alter those who are participating in these horrible and certainly unethical experiments. In our number 3 spot today, we have the UCLA schizophrenia experiments. Starting in 1983, UCLA researchers Michael Gitlin and Keith Nocherlin went to great and very unethical lengths to see just how people who are suffering from schizophrenia relapse. Basically, they were trying to figure out if there was a way to predict the relapse or a psychosis episode, and this is definitely important work that deserves attention because it could certainly have real-world benefits, but that does not mean unethical lengths should be reached. Unfortunately, this experiment involved recruiting hundreds of participants who were all being treated for schizophrenia and then taking them off of their medication. This alone has some obvious implications for the health of these people, but to make matters worse, there was no suitable plan in place for when they could return to their medication, and they also just didn't do a good enough job making sure that those participating were protected and safe given their very vulnerable state. Unfortunately, the results were disastrous and proved to be fatal when one of the participants, Antonio La Madrid, ended up taking his own life. In an article from 1994, it also says that the doctors failed to get proper informed consent from the patients as well. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Tuskegee experiment. In the years between 1932 and 1972, there were 399 black impoverished farmers in Tuskegee, Alabama, who all had syphilis, who were recruited to participate in a free program. They were told that the program would help them treat their ailment, but of course that never happened. This experiment was conducted by people who were trying to see what would happen if the disease went untreated. Instead of treating the men with penicillin, which was the recommended treatment at the time, the men received aspirin and mineral supplements as placebos. And while this experiment was conducted to try and understand what effect the spread of disease has on the body, the unethical considerations of the scientists who conducted it proved to be absolutely fatal and just downright cruel. Out of the 399, 28 of them passed away from the disease directly, 10 passed away from complications related to the disease, 40 spouses became infected, which was then passed on to 19 others at birth whose parents had been infected. This whole situation truly is one of those times where you stop and wonder how these things were ever treated as acceptable, and really just hope that things have changed for the better. In our number 1 spot today, we have Unit 731. The Imperial Japanese Army's Unit 731 conducted some pretty horrifying experiments during World War II that certainly are shocking to anyone who hears about them. The experiments were meant to be done as a way to prepare for biological warfare, but the process was gruesome and just inhumane. Different medical schools and universities provided doctors and other research staff to help conduct these experiments, and they used both prisoners and civilians as the guinea pigs. There were a bunch of different experiments that were conducted during this time, some of which involved injecting them with pathogens such as plague or cholera or anthrax. Others involved vivisection or operations with no anesthesia, putting them in a pressure chamber to see how much a human can withstand before bursting, or even live weapons testing. It is hard to even believe that this was a real thing that happened, and we honestly can't even begin to imagine what those people were forced to face during that time.
Starting our list off at number 10, microwave. I can't say microwave anymore. I have to say microwave because of this video.
Milk, full fat, which I've warmed in the microwave.
Thanks to this first invention on our list today, I can eat Hot Pockets anytime I want. Not all inventions allow you to accomplish such a feat. Percy Spencer changed the science and snack game. He was originally an American engineer working for Raytheon, but Percy also loved a snack on the site. So he had a chocolate bar in his pocket one day. He was saving it for later, but when he walked in front of a magnetron, the chocolate bar in his pocket, well, it sadly melted. But luckily for us, after a few follow-up experiments in 1945, we now get microwave ovens. And it's always a good time. It wasn't until 1967, mind you, where microwaves were in our actual homes, because of course it took a little while to narrow down. But yeah, nowadays it's great. We almost forget we have one now. It's perfect. Number 9. Super glue. I feel like we're using super glue now more than ever in history. Activists are gluing themselves to tables, streets, you name it. But who do we have to thank for such a sticky substance? Back in 1942, inventor Dr. Harry Coover was working on plastic sights for weapons. Now, this was intended to help Allied forces during World War II, but while working on these clear plastic sights, he made super glue instead. Now, obviously, he was a little busy at the time, so he shelved this invention for 9 years before returning back to the lab. Superglue didn't completely come out until 1958. It took 16 years to get to our shelves. And it's still there. We use superglue to fix everything, even the occasional social issue, it appears. Number 8, pacemaker. Here we go. This one's a tad more exciting than super glue, dare I say. A pacemaker. Odds are you know somebody with one of these right now. It all started in 1956 when Wilson Greatbach was trying to record the rhythm of the heart. Not the song, the actual rhythm of the actual heart. That's the dumbest joke I've ever put in anything in my entire life. But after installing the wrong piece by mistake, he actually realized that the circuit was emitting these pulses, these heartbeat type pulses. So he thought, well, maybe I can create a device small enough for a body and actually stimulate an actual heartbeat. Cut to 1958, a dog was the first ever proud owner of one pacemaker. He's walking around, he's like, hey, life's rough. Number 7. Theory of evolution. Charles Darwin. We don't think of this man too often for obvious reasons, but he had some ideas that were out there, right? In his book, The Origin of Species, written back in 1859, he explained how humans were evolved from the animal kingdom. And as if that wasn't already a handful of news, he also claimed that the world was much older than what everybody thought. And around the 1930s, that crazy idea was then accepted into the scientific community officially. Imagine being the first person to be like, I think we came from animals. I don't think we're aliens. I think we're actually animals. That's a hot take, right? Number 6, oxygen. Okay, speaking of hot takes, again, imagine being the first person to be like, what is this? What am I breathing right now? Why is this so good? What is oxygen? What is all this gas around us? Pretty hot take. That's a pretty bold thing to just dive into. Oxygen was identified for the first time scientifically by Joseph Priestley back in 1774. After he heated up red mercuric oxide, he found this colorless gas, and at first he called it dephlogisticated air, which is, doesn't roll off the tongue per se. And Priestley shared his discovery with the French scientist Antoine Lavoisier. Lavoisier then connected these dots, and we learned that oxygen supports animal life. And us too. We don't mind air. That's pretty nice. Number 5, not flat. Let's talk about the Earth for a hot second, shall we? Any guesses as to what shape it is? I'll tell you one thing, it's certainly not flat. Definitely not a flat planet. We can hit that thumbs up for not a flat Earth. We've known this since 1619 when Johann Kepler published the third law of planetary motion. Now this was a glorious day for the scientific community. This is when humans finally figured out that the Earth revolves around the sun and not the other way around. And also circular. That's also a great point to learn at the same time, that it's not flat. For sure not flat, definitely a circle. If you're a flat earther, hit that thumbs up. We're learning today, Number 4, Velcro. Alright, shout out to every guy out there with a Velcro wallet. Keep doing it, man. I still have mine from high school. I'll never abandon that thing ever in my life. It's still got some stick left in them. Who must we thank for Velcro? I use Velcro every day. I use them on my rock climbing shoes so I don't fall off the wall. And it's all thanks to a Swiss engineer named Georges de Mestral. And back in 1941, he found these burrs clinging to his pants and his dog's fur. He went for a walk and then he was covered in all those spiky balls. That's the worst, eh? That happens so often. We've all been there, but we've certainly never been inspired like George was. The word Velcro is actually a combination of velvet and crochet. Now these artificial hooks that stick on your clothes, they were heavily used by NASA first in the 1960s, and then for us, of course, when we weren't ready to tie our shoes. Number 3, the discovery of penicillin. Sometimes miracles happen when nobody's even in the room, right? It's like boiling water or something like that, you have to look away. A watched pot never boils. It certainly does though, Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin back in 1928. Now at the time, he was actually studying Staphylococcus, bacteria that causes infections and boils and nasty stuff. But right before Alexander left for a 2-week vacation, he left a petri dish with some of that Staphylococcus just on the lab table, rather than stored away in an incubator. Turns out everybody here needed alone time because during this off time, a penicillium mold spore just got the confidence to introduce itself to said bacteria. And now the room's temperature was also perfect. It was a lovely moment for everybody involved. Plus the emptiness of the room allowed for the mold to finally fight back in peace and prevent that bacteria from growing furthermore. He discovered this antibacterial substance was only produced by strains of penicillium. Guy's like, all right, see you in 2 weeks. Comes back to a literal miracle. It's like, what? Number 2, the Trinity test. Not all of these are Velcro and fun and games, okay? Some science discoveries suck. When Americans heard that Germans were developing nuclear weapons, they joined in with their development on a project, most of it being done in New Mexico. So in 1939, President Roosevelt got scientists, military officials, this whole team of brilliant individuals to figure out how to use uranium as a weapon. The government eventually started to fund said research, which was happening at Columbia University, And in 1942, engineers from the Army joined in as well. And following Pearl Harbor, that's when President Roosevelt transitioned the project into a military branch officially, the Manhattan Project, made with the strict goal of weaponizing nuclear energy. There were facilities in New Mexico, Tennessee, Washington, even here in Canada, you name it. But come July 16, 1945, the Trinity test was conducted. The first atomic weapon was detonated in a New Mexico desert, and it was deemed a success, with mushroom clouds reaching as high as 40,000 feet. It was, that was definitely life-changing, for sure. And finally, number 1, Coca-Cola. All right, we'll finish on a nice sweet note. Let's do it. Every time it's the holiday season, I see nothing but Coca-Cola ads. I don't know how they do it. They've somehow tapped into the entire holiday season. But how does such a syrup come to be in the first place? We'll end on this one so we can all grab a drink immediately after the video ends. I got you, I know how to do this. Inventor and pharmacist John Pemberton originally set out to cure headaches, which is pretty ironic. 2 main ingredients, of course, being coca leaves and cola nuts. Now, things were boring, dare I say, until his lab assistant accidentally mixed the two with carbonated water. And then, poof, it's a miracle. It's like they knew, it's like they were from the future and they're like, hey, trust me, I got us. Over time, you throw in this top secret recipe, which we still don't know, and now we have a movie theater essential, and one of my favorite soft drinks, Coca-Cola. Personally, actually, I'm lying. I'm a Dr. Pepper guy, if anything. 23 flavors? How in the world do they get it in that little can? If we get a part 2, I'll throw Dr. Pepper in. There you go. Number 10, the turkey fake-out. This next one here is pretty funny. I had to include it. Back in the 1960s, turkey biologists in Pennsylvania thought, what if a male turkey was in a room with a fake turkey? What would happen, right? Would he try and flirt, right? Let's see what happens. Would he I Am Legend this fake turkey and just continue on living like everything's normal? Yes, turns out the answer is yes. These male turkeys would actually try and mate with the fake turkey, but by the end of the tests, they just had a head of a turkey on a stick. A fake turkey also, that'd be horrible. But these dudes still came out like, hey, what's going on, you single? Even though it was a stick with a photo of a turkey. These guys had no idea. How funny is that? They were just slowly taking away parts of a real turkey, and these dudes were coming out still with the same game plan, with the same keys to the VIP plan to get with that turkey, even though it's a broom. Number 9, spider art. I have to start our list off with NASA's 1995 spider tests. I was always afraid of spiders growing up, and once I heard about this, it kind of helped out. So I don't know, maybe I'll help you as well. When nature meets science, we often get jarring results, be it hybrid animals, clones, you name it. Spiders, as fascinating as they already are, can be even more mysterious, believe it or not, especially when they're exposed to mind-altering illicit substances. NASA wanted to determine the toxicity between these substances and what differences they may look like in use. So spiders, being as fascinating as they are, we can see how they think and survive with their webs. We see it up close, when we accidentally walk through them and we go, ew. But we never see them like this, right? Caffeinated behavior is all over the place, right? It doesn't even look like a normal web at all. But with hallucinogens, it's the same shape, but it's almost missing steps. I don't think any animal should have coffee. I don't think an espresso goes well with a bug. Or a human, really. Number 8, Zorse. It's a fun one to say, let's do it. Zorse. It's a great word. Zorse. Male zebra, female horse. Now we get a really fun word. The Zorse. Sounds like a god. Thor, Odin, and Zorse. Zebroids are also quite common historically. See, Charles Darwin even noted some in his early work. So since the 19th century, crossbreeding zebras with horses or donkeys, it's all been done. More often than not, and this is what makes them stand out, zebroids will experience dwarfism. Yeah, they're quite cute, I can't lie. In 2010, a zedonk was born, a zebra donkey, but again, back in the 70s, 3 were born in Colchester Zoo. Yeah, way back then. Probably forgot about that. These zookeepers were like, how do we make the zoos new and hip? Oh, I have an idea. Yeah, bizarre. Humans aren't too smart. Let's stop mixing animal DNA. We get pretty jarring results all the time, I think. Number 7, inner armor. All right, let's change it up a little bit, shall we? DARPA's Inner Armor Project. This was the Pentagon's way of creating super soldiers. Yeah, and Marvel Phase 5 or whatever, couldn't be a better time to bring this out. Scientists use animals as a reference for these new abilities, like literally from a Marvel movie. They're studying the DNA of the stellar sea lion because it can reduce blood flow away from organs if need be in order to reduce oxygen demand to survive. Yeah, that's like a superpower. We gotta figure that out. That would be sweet. Just Aquaman with a tactical vest? Okay, sure, let's do it. Dr. Michael Callahan, who is in charge of running the operation, says that the goal is to make soldiers kill-proof against disease, chemical weapons, radioactive weapons, harsh weather conditions, you name it, all that stuff. Now, this was back in 2007, and then later in 2014, Barack Obama just came out of nowhere and announced that the United States is working on building Iron Man. Yeah, apparently that wasn't a joke. Number 6, the Milgram experiment. All right, we gotta turn it up a little bit, shall we? While learning about our past in further detail, like the Trinity test, for example, and how that led to the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it's important to understand why these things happened and how people like the Germans were so easily influenced into doing what they did. So the Milgram experiment was put in place to start getting some ideas, right? How far will people go when it comes to obeying instructions, specifically if it involves a third party being hurt? Stanley Milgram, Yale psychologist, he created this test, and there's 3 important rules for this one. There's the teacher, the experimenter, and the learner. The learner is disguised as the main test subject, but they're really in on the whole thing. The real subject is actually the teacher, the one administering pain to the test subject. Yeah, they're told by this higher figure, whatever, to keep upping the pain every time they get a question wrong. So the real test is to see how far humans will go when hurting others. The icing on this experiment, of course, is that the subject isn't actually getting shocked at all. These tests were underway in 1961 in a basement at Yale University. Imagine taking the wrong turn on your way to class, you end up here. It's terrible. Number 5, go pills. Okay, look out, 5-hour energy. We're pulling an all-nighter for this one. Every time I watch Lord of the Rings, I fall asleep. I can't help it. It's a lovely film, but it's so cozy. The music, just tucks me in, and I'm gone. Also, it's like 4.5 hours, so, it's not my fault. But that's not an issue in the real world, is it? No. Overnight truck drivers struggling to stay awake to pay the bills, that's a bit more important, I'd say. And that's where go pills were supposed to come into play. The pill that keeps you up for 40 hours straight. Yeah, doesn't that sound like a nightmare? What the hell? The US Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, again, DARPA, is currently funding this pill. The benefits it would have, I gotta say, if this thing works, I'm kinda on board, honestly. I can finally play 50 turns in a single round of Mario Party without having to sleep in between. It can finally be done. Or Monopoly. I can do 1 round of Monopoly, finally. Number 4, chimpanzee human. Also referred to as a human-Z. Sounds awfully terrifying right off the bat. Look, here are the facts, people. We are very close to chimpanzees. Around 98% of our DNA is shared with that of a chimpanzee. That's why we look awfully familiar with our hands and beautiful eyes. Back in the 1920s, we got closer than ever. A human-Z was not just a fantasy. Soviet biologist Ilya Ivanov inseminated female chimps with DNA, but it didn't work. Or did it? See, things got questionable when a chimp named Oliver hit the scene later in the 70s. He was walking like a human, referred to as the missing link because of his appearance. Yeah, he was previously a performance animal. He was a show chimp, so not a hybrid, but many viewed these experiments as immoral back in the day. Which is odd because I remember seeing chimps in family movies. I remember seeing like Most Extreme Primate, where he's doing like skateboard tricks, or he's like snowboarding all of a sudden. Air Bud as well. I don't know. What made these animals do all these sports? You know what I mean? Number 9, lions. Back in the 80s at the Chatbir Zoo in India, they started an experimental program where they would breed together a domestic lion, which is a bit smaller and has a less shaggy mane, with an African lion in the hopes that they could, be introduced into the wild and help with the dwindling population of wild lions in India. Sounds like a great plan on paper. Sure, here we go. That's a step forward. But is it? No. The zoo found 2 African lions that were being used in a circus and then brought them in to breed with their 2 Asiatic lions. Now, when the cubs were born, it was clear that this was already a grave mistake, as the cubs already had severely weak back legs. They couldn't even walk. They were having extreme trouble walking, and as they got older, their immune systems started to fail. And by 2000, they had bred more than 70 of these hybrid lions, and they finally decided to stop the program, and all the males were given vasectomies in order to stop any further reproduction ever. Thing is, there are laws that prohibited them from killing animals, so they were simply just waiting around for them to die off naturally. Yeah, when there's a dwindling population of lions, it's insane to me that they wasted 20 years trying to do this when they could have just simply bred lions that they had. I don't know. Number 2. Pyrenean ibex. The Pyrenean ibex also went extinct, now this time much sooner than mammoths. Actually around 2000, period. Not 2,000 years ago, like 2000 the year. Yeah, the last one was a female named Celia, and a falling tree sadly killed her. of all the ways to go. Really? That's just brutal. A subspecies of the Spanish ibex, the Pyrenean ibex, were native to the Pyrenees Mountains on the border of Spain and France. Now, back in the medieval ages, their population was reduced drastically to an endangered level. Knights and swords equals lunch. We now have lunch. So the numbers dipped, okay? More than fair. We got armies to feed, yada yada. But in 2009, science was ready for the Pyrenean ibex to return. Okay, that's a little odd. It was successfully cloned and brought back from extinction for 7 minutes. DNA from the last living lady was implanted in the womb of a domestic goat. Lung complications are why the clone ultimately didn't survive, but we had a hybrid medieval animal back for 7 minutes. We're getting close. To what? Not really sure, but we're getting close to something. And finally, number 1. The kunga, perhaps the earliest example of human-animal hybrid testing ever. Scientists recently learned about this donkey hybrid that once roamed ancient Mesopotamia. Now, this was a time before even horses were on this land, right? This was a long time ago. So they had to do something. Large kungas would pull wagons, and smaller ones would help pull plows. These little guys were the talk of the town. Imagine a hybrid animal before horses. No wonder they were a status symbol. Let's go. 4,000 years ago, they were given as gifts for weddings. Yummy. I wonder if this is a kunga. It smells like a kunga. After so long, scientists are finally able to figure out what exactly a kunga was a hybrid of. It was a female donkey and a male Syrian wild ass. Yeah, just a wild hybrid ass. It's pretty insane what you can still learn from ancient animal bones even from thousands of years ago. It's fascinating. More amazing how evolved this hybrid was in Mesopotamian culture. I don't know, should we bring back the kunga? Imagine seeing this thing in a farm, just pulling something. Number 10, feel the music. There are many odd experiments in history where humans, should have left human elements out of it. Like music and illicit substances. I can't say what I want to say, but it's a bad substance that's white. There you go, paint the image in your head. There you go, we'll move around YouTube's algorithm. Back in 2011, a study was done where rats, or rather a bunch of rats, were all put in a room and on loop, they played a Miles Davis song just over and over again. So they were all on said substances and they were in a room while Miles Davis played. This is a science experiment, may I add. Just smooth jazz for these rats all day long. Imagine walking into that room, you're like, what's going on in here? It's kind of fun, dare I say. Well, before the substances were injected into these test subjects, they all seemed to have calm demeanors while Beethoven was playing. But after injected, all the rats were neurologically triggered to that smooth jazz. They acted differently in a group setting, which is kind of weird. After a full week on the, not so great sauce, the rats were all of a sudden like, you know what? We love Miles Davis now. We changed our minds. So yeah, illicit substances changes how you listen to music apparently. If you're a rat, any rats watching, hit that thumbs up with your little rat hands. Number 9, the first pregnancy test. If you're looking past the ancient Egyptians and their use of barley and urine to determine if somebody's pregnant, you'll often land on this experiment from the 1930s. It's pretty close. It's heavily inspired. It was developed in 1931 by Maurice Friedman at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. Now what would happen here is doctors would inject a rabbit with urine from a woman who was suspected of being pregnant, and the rabbit's ovaries could easily tell if that was the case. Accurate? Yes. Historical? Changes the game? Why, of course. Would it also end up with the rabbit passing away every single time? Yes. It's sad more often than not when humans are involved in any medical process, but we're trying to not do that anymore. We're doing pretty good. All those furs were like, nah, get out of here. Number 8, kunga. Perhaps the earliest example of human-animal hybrid testing. Here we go. Scientists recently learned about this donkey hybrid that once roamed ancient Mesopotamia. This was a long time ago. This was before horses had even arrived to land, so they had to do something, right? They needed help pulling stuff. So large kungas would step in and they would pull wagons, and smaller kungas would help pulling plows. These little guys were the talk of the town. Imagine a hybrid animal before horses. No wonder they were a status symbol, come on. 4,000 years ago, they were given as gifts for weddings. Yummy, can you imagine that? I think it's a kunga. It smells like a kunga. I think it's definitely a kunga. After so long, scientists are finally able to figure out what exactly a kunga was a hybrid of. This whole time, it was a female donkey and a male Syrian wild ass. Put them together, what a wild time. It's wild what you still learn about ancient animal bones from thousands and thousands of years ago. More amazing how involved this hybrid was in Mesopotamian culture. I don't know, should we bring back the kunga? Kind of neat. Kunga Uber, I would take those. Hop in a little cart. Number 7, human cow eggs. Okay, we had a few giggles with that one. Time to get into some real dark science stuff. Back in 2008, hybrid research was being done. Human animal hybrid research obviously was being done because, of course, the whole idea was to find a cure for Parkinson's disease. Now, I like these projects because we're moving forward at least, or we're trying to. We're trying to find a solution in some way, shape, or form, right? Road's gonna get a little dirty, but we'll figure it out. Otherwise, we don't need to be poking around cows, you know what I mean? Nobody needs 3 bowls of cereal before gym class anymore. Those days are over. There's other ways to wake up. I would do the beep test, I almost throw up every single day. Yeah, I would just have a full bowl of cereal and then just go to class and like play baseball all morning. It's like, geez. Scientists used the nucleus of a cow egg. They took it out and replaced that nucleus with that of human and skin cells. Add in a little time and the egg can now develop and turn into a blastocyst, aka a clone embryo. And there we have stem cells for says science. Again, this is a lovely step, but how far do we go? How much DNA are we gonna mix before, things can go south? For example, like Number 6, monkey head transplant. Okay, here we go. The first ever successful monkey head transplant. Crazy that I'm saying that out loud. This was back in the early 1970s. I imagine some of your parents may have heard of this. I don't know, I bet it would be hard to forget. Ask them. Ask them in the middle of dinner when they're mid-bite. Ask them about the monkey head transplant from the 70s. Just ruined dinner. American researcher Robert White, he pulled off the, otherwise impossible and a slow, tedious operation. See, White took the head of one monkey and then attached it to a already headless monkey. Add a little time and energy and some science and voila, this actually worked. Yeah, the monkey actually tried to bite one of the surgeons once it came to life, which, totally fair. I'd probably be a little upset too. Sadly, the monkey passed away 9 days later, but like I said, the fact this actually happened, one, it's terrifying, and 2, dare I say, it's miraculous. Some sci-fi stuff right here. We're moving heads, we're transferring heads for 9 business days. You're gross. Number 5. Monkey become human. This next one's a little less hands-on, so, if you have food, now you can probably take a bite. It's probably safe for now. Back in 1931, psychologist Winthrop Kellogg, familiar name, he was curious. He sat up one night out of the blue and thought, you know what? What would happen if a monkey was raised with human beings? Would it end up like that, monkey from MVP? Would it learn to play hockey for the local team? Or would operations go south quickly? The latter happened. Yeah, no hockeys are doing any crosses and deeks. It's all bad. When it comes to animals and science, it's pretty bad. It's nothing like the cinema. None of that shit happened at all. Kellogg instead brought a baby female chimp named Gua into his home. Yeah, this man raised the chimp as if it were another human being alongside his own human being son, Donald, which is just a wild time growing up. I'd rather you have an imaginary friend than a monkey as a friend. That's pretty dangerous. But they did everything together. They played, they went to bed, they did all their human stuff. The test was working, but it ended abruptly after Kellogg's son, Donald, started to make chimp noises. Yeah, and then everybody was like, you know what? Let's not do that. That was terrifying. Maybe chimps can't learn how to kickflip. Maybe instead humans just go backwards in evolution. So Gua was then released and no more human best friend. Back to, dare I say, normal. I always wanted a monkey best friend growing up. Now I don't. Now I really don't. Number 4, multi-dog. The multi-dog. Yeah, this is gross. This was back in the 50s when a Soviet scientist, Vladimir Demikov, created, a multi-headed dog. It's pretty easy. Time magazine covered it. Of course, this is again a feat in science, as disgusting as it is. The adult dog had a newborn grafted to its neck, so when it grew, it could somehow survive off the blood of the main, bigger dog. The body, for a lack of a better term. Gross. When observed, the puppy did have its own characteristics. It was playful as it growls, just as the other dog's characteristics would be. Now, it is a sad 1950s Soviet animal experiment, so of course that animal didn't survive a very long time. But crossbreeding experiments from hell, this is why we're here, you know what I mean? It's like that 3-headed dog from Harry Potter, you know what I mean? Cerberus, I think his name is Cerberus. This, a little more terrifying, a little more jarring, I'd say, to look at. After you play Harry Potter chess, this thing pops out, you're like, ooh. Never mind, 0 points for Gryffindor. Number 3, lions. Back in the 1980s at the Chatbir Zoo in India, they started this experimental program where they would breed together a domestic lion, which is a bit smaller and has a less shaggy mane. They would breed that with an African lion in hopes that they would meet in the middle and be introduced to the wild and somehow help with the dwindling population of wild lions in India. Now on paper, this sounds like a great idea, dare I say a step forward for the animals and the wild, but it wasn't. Nope, that's why we're here on this list. The zoo found 2 African lions that were being used in a circus, and then they brought them in to breed with their 2 Asiatic lions. Now, when the cubs were born, it was clear this was already a mistake, as the cubs had severely weak back legs right off the hop. It wasn't looking good. They were having extreme trouble walking, and as they got older, their immune system started to fail. Now by 2000, they had bred more than 70 of these new hybrid lions, and it was too late, right? They'd finally decided to stop the program, and all the males were then given vasectomies in order to stop any further reproduction. But there are laws that prohibited them from killing any animals, so they were simply just waiting for them to die of natural causes, which, I mean, in this case doesn't really exist. Where there's a dwindling population of lions, it's insane to me that they wasted 20 years doing this when they could have just, simply bred the lions that they had with other lions. Probably harder than it sounds, but I mean, I don't know. What the f is this? New lions with like Bambi legs? That's way worse. Number 2, spider art. Nice. This is like Art Attack, but terrifying because I hate spiders. Before our number 1 spot, I have to mention NASA's 1995 spider test. They're a little cool, dare I say. When nature meets science, we often get jarring results, be it hybrid animals, clones, monkeys going on and off, you name it. Spiders, as fascinating as they already are, can be even more mysterious, especially when they're exposed to, how do I say this, mind-altering illicit substances. You got it? NASA wanted to determine the toxicity between all of these substances and what differences they may look like in real life. Now, spiders are fascinating. We can see how they think and survive every day. We see it up close. We walk through them and we go right in your face. But we never see them like this before. Caffeinated behavior is all over the place when it comes to their web. It doesn't look like a normal web at all. But with hallucinogens, it's the same shape of a web, but it's almost missing steps. I don't think any animal should also have coffee, let alone hallucinogens. My God, no way. Also, I can't even have coffee. I'm crazy when I have coffee, let alone any of this shit. And finally, number 1, the mouse with an ear on its back. Yeah, the title says it all. I could say that and we could be done here, but I think I have to explain a bit more. If we ever reboot Stuart Little, this guy has to audition. Let's do it. A live action? Are you kidding me? He'd f it up. Back in 1997, this Vacanti mouse became the test subject to determine if scientists could grow cartilage using chondrocytes, aka cells from a cow. Well, it worked, and we're still talking about it. I'm still talking about it, obviously. I mean, look at this. Now, it all started when Joseph Vacanti, pediatric surgeon, he began designing human organs. Now, this was during a shortage. He wasn't just born and, started to make ears like a serial killer. No, he was changing the medical game. And little did he know, he was about to change the science game as well. He constructed a regular looking ear, and he told his brother Chuck and his partner Bob to not bring up the fact that he attached said ear to a live mouse. Now, that's a pretty hard secret to keep, I imagine, so Chuck ended up spilling the beans. Now everybody knows, but at the same time, now we all know that cow cartilage can create cells, which is pretty good. That's pretty good science. Can grow ears. I want to Q-tip his ear back thing, you know what I mean?